Section 14, page 59. He had stopped and faced her in the excitement of their discussion, and her eyes rested on him with a bright, unclouded admiration. "Mercy, shall we elope?" she laughed. "If you would, you do love me, Newland. I'm so happy." "But then, why not be happier? Why can't we behave like people in novels, though, can we?" "Why not, why not, why not?" She looked a little bored by his insistence. She knew very well that they couldn't, but it was troublesome to have to produce a reason. "I'm not clever enough to argue with you, but that kind of thing is rather vulgar, isn't it?" she suggested, relieved to have hit on a word that would assuredly extinguish the whole subject. "Are you so much afraid, then, of being vulgar?" She was evidently staggered by this. "Of course, I should hate it, so would you," she rejoined, a trifle irritably. He stood silent, beating his stick nervously against his boot-up, and feeling that she had indeed found the right way of closing the discussion, she went on light-heartedly. "Oh, did I tell you that I showed Ellen my ring? She thinks it the most beautiful setting she saw. There is nothing like it in the Rue des Pays," she said. "I do love you, Newland, for being so artistic." The next afternoon saw as Archer, before dinner, sat smoking sullenly in his study. Janie wandered in on him. He had failed to stop at his club on the way up from the office, where he exercised the profession of the law in the leisurely manner common to well-to-do New Yorkers of his class. He was out of spirits and slightly out of temper, and a haunting horror of doing the same thing every day, at the same hour, besides his brain. "Sameness, sameness," he muttered, the word running through his head like a persecuting tune, as he saw familiar tall-hatted figures longing behind the plate glass, and because he usually dropped in at the club at the hour, he had gone home instead. He knew not only what they were likely to be talking about, but the part each one would take in the discussion. The Duke, of course, would be their principal theme, though the appearance of Fifth Avenue of a golden-haired lady in a small canary-colored brougham with a pair of black cups, in parentheses, for which Beaufort was generally thought responsible, would also doubtless be truly gone into. Such women, in parentheses, as they were called, were few in New York, those driving their own carriages, still fewer, and their appearance of Miss Fanny Ring in Fifth Avenue at the fashionable hour had profoundly agitated society. Only the day before, her carriage had passed Mrs. Lovell Mingott's, and the latter had instantly rang the little bell at her elbow and ordered the coachman to drive her home. What if it had happened to Mrs. Van der Luyden? People asked each other with a shudder. Archer could hear Lawrence Lefferts, at that very hour, holding forth on the disintegration of society. He raised his head irritably when his sister Janie entered, and then quickly bent over his book, in parentheses, Swinburne's Chastelard, just out, as if he had not seen her. She glanced at the writing table heaped with books, opened a volume of the Comtesse Drolatiques, made a wry face over the archaic French, and sighed. "What learned things you read." "Well," he asked, as she hovered Cassandra-like before him. "Mother's very angry." "Angry? With whom? About what?" "Miss Sophie Jackson has just been here. She brought word that her brother would come in after dinner. She couldn't say very much, because he forbade her to. He wishes to give all the details himself. He's with cousins Louisa van der Luyden now." "For heaven's sake, my dear girl, try a fresh start. It will take an omniscient deity to know what you are talking about." "It is not time to be profane, Newland. Mother feels badly enough about your not going to church." With a groan, he plunged back into his book. "Newland, do listen. Your friend Madame Olenska was at Mrs. Lamel's tutor's party last night. She went there with the Duke and Mr. Beaufort. At the last close of this announcement, a senseless anger swelled the young man's breast. To smother it, he laughed. Well, what of it? I knew she meant to. Janie paled and her eyes began to project. You knew she meant to, and you didn't try to stop her? To warn her? Stop her, warn her, he laughed again. I'm not engaged to be married to Countess Olenska. The word had a fantastic sound in his own ears. You are marrying into our family. Ah, family. Family, he jeered. Newland, don't you care about family? Not a brass farting. Nor about what cousin Lisa van der Luyden will think. Not the half of one, if she thinks such old maid's rubbish. Mother is not an old maid, said his virgin sister with pinched lips. He felt like shouting back. Yes, she is, and so are the van der Luydens. And so we all are, when it comes to being so much as brushed by the wingtip of reality. But he saw her long gentle face puckered into tears, and felt ashamed of the useless pain he was inflicting. Hang Countess Olenska, don't be a goose, Janie. I am not her keeper. No, but you did ask the Vallens to announce your engagement sooner, so that we might all back her up. And if it hadn't been for that, Cousin Lisa would never have invited her to the dinner for the Duke. Well, what harm was there in inviting her? She was the best-looking woman in the room. She made the dinner a little less funereal than the usual van der Luyden banquet. You know, Cousin Henry asked her to please you. He persuaded Cousin Lisa. And now they are so upset that they are going back to Skyter Cliff tomorrow. I think, Newland, you would better calm down. You don't seem to understand how Mother feels. In the drawing room, Newland found his mother. She raised a troubled brow from her needlework to ask, Has Janie told you? Yes, he tried to keep his tone as measured as her own. But I can't take it seriously. Not the fact of having offended Cousin Lisa and Cousin Henry? The fact that they can be offended by such a trifle as Countess Olenska's going to the house of a woman they consider common. Consider? Well, who is? But who has good music and amuses people on Sunday evenings when the whole of New York is dying of initiation? Good music? All I know is there was a woman who got up on a table and sang the things they sing at the places you go to in Paris. There was smoking and champagne. Well, that kind of things happens in other places, and the world still goes on. I don't suppose, dear, you are really defending the French Sunday? I've heard you often enough, Mother, grumble at the English Sunday when we've been in London. New York is neither Paris nor London. Oh no, it's not, her son groaned. You mean, I suppose, that society here is not as brilliant. You are right, I dare say. But we belong here, and people should respect our ways when they come among us. Ellen Olenska especially. She came back to get away from the kind of people led in brilliant society. Newland made no answer, and after a moment his mother ventured. I was going to put on my bonnet and ask you to take me to see Cousin Lisa for a moment before dinner. He frowned, and she continued, I thought you might explain to her what you have just said, that society abroad is different, that people are not as particular, and that Madame Olenska may not have realized how we feel about such things. It will be, you know, dear, she added with an innocent adroitness, in Madame Olenska's interest, if you did. Dearest mother, I really don't see how we are concerned in the matter. The Duke took Madame Olenska to Mrs. Stutter's. In fact, he brought Mrs. Stutter's to call on her. I was there when they came. If the van der Luydens want to quarrel with anybody, the real culprit is under their roof. Quarrel? Newland, did you ever know of Cousin Henry's quarrelling? Besides the Duke's his guest, and a stranger too. Strangers don't discriminate. How should they? Countess Olenska is a New Yorker, and should have respected the feelings of New York. Well done, if they must have a victim, you have my leave to throw Madame Olenska to them, cried her son, exasperated. I don't see myself, or you either, offering ourselves up to expiate her crimes. Oh, of course you see only the mingled side, his mother answered. in the sensitive tone that was her nearest approach to anger. The said butler drew back the drawing-room portieres and announced, "Mr. Henry van der Luyden." Mrs. Archer dropped her needle and pushed her chair back with an agitated hand. "Another lamp," she cried to a retreating servant, while Janey bent over to straighten her mother's cap. Mr. van der Luyden's figure loomed on the threshold, and Newland Archer went forward to greet his cousin. "We were just talking about you, sir," he said. Mr. van der Luyden seemed overwhelmed by the announcement. He drew off his glove to shake hands with the ladies, and smoothed his tall hat shyly, while Janey pushed an armchair forward, and Archer continued, "And the Countess Olenska." Mrs. Archer paled. "Ah, a charming woman. I have just been to see her," said Mr. van der Luyden, complacency restored to his brow. He sank into the chair, laid his hat and gloves on the floor beside him, in the old-fashioned way, and went on. "She has a real gift for arranging flowers. I had sent her a few carnations from XIII, and I was astonished. Instead of massing them in big bunches as our head gardener does, she had scattered them about loosely, here and there. I can't say how. The Duke had told me, he said, 'Go and see how cleverly she's arranged her drawing-room.' And she has. I should really like to take Louisa to see her, if the neighborhood were not so unpleasant." A dead silence greeted this unusual flow of words from Mr. van der Luyden. Mrs. Archer drew her embroidery out of the basket, into which she had nervously tumbled it, and Newland, leaning against the chimney-place and twisting a hummingbird feather screen in his hand, saw Jane's gaping countenance lit by up the coming of the second lamp. "The fact is," Mr. van der Luyden continued, stroking his long grey leg with a bloodless hand weighed down by the patron's great signet ring, "the fact is, I dropped in to thank her for the very pretty note she wrote me about my flowers, and also, but this is between ourselves, of course, to give her a friendly warning about the allowing the Duke to carry her off to parties with him. If I don't know if you've heard." Mrs. Archer produced an indulgent smile. "Has the Duke been carrying her off to parties? You know what these English grandees are. They are all alike. Louisa and I are very fond of our cousin, but it is hopeless to expect people who are accustomed to European courts to trouble themselves about our little republican distinctions. The Duke goes where he is amused." Mr. van der Luyden paused, but no one spoke. "Yes, it seems he took her with him last night to Mrs. Lamel Strutter's. Sillerton Jackson has just been to us with the foolish story, and Louisa was rather troubled. So I thought the shortest way was to go straight to Countess Olenska and explain. By the merest hint, you know, how we feel in New York about certain things. I felt I might, without indelicacy, because the evening she dined with us, she rather suggested, rather let me see that she would be grateful for guidance, and she was." Mr. van der Luyden looked about the room with what would have been self-satisfaction on features less purged of the vulgar passions. On his face it became a white benevolence, which Mrs. Archer's countenance dutifully reflected. "How kind you both are, dear Henry, always. Newland will particularly appreciate what you have done because of dear May and his new relations." She shot an admonitory glance at her son, who said, "Immensely, sir, but I was sure you would like Madame Olenska." Mr. van der Luyden looked at him with extreme gentleness. "I never ask to my house, my dear Newland," he said, "anyone whom I do not like, and so I have just told Sillerton Jackson." With a glance at the clock, he rose and added, "But Louisa will be waiting. We are dining early, to take the Duke to the opera." After the portieres had solemnly closed behind their visitor, a silence fell upon the Archer family. "Gracious, how romantic!" at last broke explosively from Janey. No one knew exactly what inspired her elliptic moments, and her relations had long since given up trying to interpret them. Mrs. Archer shook her head with a sigh. "Provided it all turns out for the best," she said, in the tone of one who knows how surely it will not. "Newland, you must stay and see Sillerton Jackson when he comes this evening. I really shan't know what to say to him. Poor Mater, but he won't come." Her son laughed, stooping to kiss away her frown. End of the chapter. Page 64.